The boardroom on the 41st floor of Callaway Financial Partners had 17 people in it. The morning they escorted Marcus Webb out of the building, and I was one of them. I have thought about that morning every single day since. Not because of what they did to him, because of what he did when they did it. He set his coffee mug down on the conference table with the careful attention of a man placing something irreplaceable on a shelf. He buttoned the middle button of his jacket. He looked at the new CEO, at Diane Callaway herself, 38 years old, 3 weeks into the role, standing at the head of the table with her arms crossed and her jaw set the way a person holds their jaw when they have already decided and do not intend to be moved, and he said one sentence. The Reconciliation Archive is the only thing keeping the Series D disclosures clean. Nobody in that room understood what that meant. Not Diane, not CFO Preston Hale, who was standing just behind her left shoulder with his hands folded and his face arranged into something that looked, from where I was sitting, almost like regret but was in fact something considerably more calculated. Not the compliance team. Not the board liaison seated at the far end of the table with his reading glasses pushed up onto his forehead. Not any of the 7 consultants who had arrived that morning from 2 different firms, carrying matching laptop bags and billing at rates that would have made a reasonable person take a seat before opening the invoice. Marcus Webb understood what it meant, and then he walked out. I have been a systems auditor at Callaway Financial for 11 years. I have watched a great many people leave that building under difficult circumstances. Some left angry, with the particular loud anger of people who want witnesses to their going. Some left relieved, as though the building itself had been something they had been holding their breath inside. Some left in the flat, stunned silence of people who had genuinely not seen it coming, and were still absorbing the impact while their feet continued to move them forward. I have never, in 11 years, watched anyone leave the way Marcus Webb left. No box of personal items. No backward glance at the floor he had 4 years maintaining with the quiet precision of someone who understands exactly what they are tending. He walked past my desk on his way to the elevator, and I watched his hands, those particular unhurried hands that I had watched run through 4 years of financial architecture in the early mornings before the rest of the floor came alive, and they were completely still. He pressed the elevator button once. The doors opened, he stepped in, the doors closed, and the only person in that building who understood, at full depth, what was holding our disclosures together was gone. What I am about to tell you is not the version the financial press eventually published. It is not the version Preston Hale's attorneys entered into the arbitration record, phrased in the careful passive voice of people whose job is to manage a narrative rather than describe events. It is the version I watched happen from 12 feet away, over the course of 41 days that I will carry with me for the rest of my professional life. Not because those days were dramatic, though parts of them were, but because they changed in a fundamental way what I believe about the kind of person it is quietly possible to be. Stay with this. Because the man they walked out of that building on an ordinary Tuesday morning was not who any of us thought he was, and what he had been building every morning, 11 minutes, for 4 years without announcement or credit or complaint, was the only reason Callaway Financial Partners had anything left worth protecting at all. That Tuesday had begun the way Marcus's Tuesdays always began. I know this, not because I was there, but because his daughter told me so, months later, in the particular way that children share things, without understanding what they are giving you, without performance, the way they hand you a drawing they made and have already turned back to something else. Her name was Nora. She was 6 years old. She had dark, steady eyes that moved through a room the way her father's eyes moved through a spreadsheet, unhurried, systematic, not missing much. She carried with her everywhere and without exception a small stuffed rabbit named Spool, gray flannel, one ear slightly longer than the other, which was a consequence of the original stitching and had never been corrected because it had become, over 6 years, definitively Spool's ear. A repair along the left seam done in white thread that did not quite match the fabric, patient, precise, and slightly misaligned in the way that something mended with genuine care is always slightly misaligned, because the person doing the mending was focused on the repair lasting rather than on its being invisible. Marcus's wife, Catherine, had bought the rabbit the week Nora was born, and pressed it into the crook of the infant's arm in the hospital room with the particular certainty of a woman who knows, without needing to be told, what a child will need to carry through the world. Catherine had died 14 months after that. An aneurysm, a Tuesday morning. Nora had been asleep in the next room, the sketchbooks Catherine kept. 3 of them, full of careful drawings of cars she loved, rendered with the attention of someone who found beauty in the way things were engineered, in the specific logic of form-serving function, were still on the hallway shelf exactly where she had left them. Marcus had not opened them since the week after the funeral. He had not returned to Bench 7 in Harwick Park since the last summer she was well enough to sit there. He had not said any of this to anyone at work. It was not the kind of thing that lands correctly when offered without invitation, and Marcus was not a man who spoke until he was certain the words could do their full work. He had left his position as lead reconciliation architect at Hargrove Capital 6 weeks after Catherine's funeral. He had not been asked to leave. He had held that role for 7 years. He had designed, from its first technical specification, the proprietary verification framework that Hargrove's compliance division still depended on and would continue to depend on for years after his departure, billed to clients under a name that was not his. Among the small number of people in institutional financial architecture who understood what his work actually required, the specific and unusual combination of systems thinking, regulatory literacy, and the particular patience of someone who is comfortable long hours with very large amounts of data and very small margins for error. He was regarded as one of 3 or 4 minds operating at a level the broader field had not fully caught up to. He left because the role required 18-hour days and constant international availability and the kind of sustained professional absorption that is simply incompatible with being the only adult in a house where a 14-month-old child needs to be picked up from daycare at 3:15 in the afternoon, every afternoon, without exception and without an alternate plan. He took a position at Callaway Financial as a senior systems auditor at $83,407 per year. The role ended at 3 o'clock. He did not explain this decision to anyone. His colleagues saw a quiet man in his early 40s who wore the same gray jacket with the worn right cuff 3 days a week, and drank his coffee without speaking until 9 a.m., and never raised his hand in meetings to offer opinions that had not been specifically requested. They read this as a person of modest ambition who had located his ceiling and made a practical peace with it. Some of them, I think, felt a vague sympathy for him. A man of a certain age in a mid-level role doing competent work that asked less than he could clearly have given. They were not unkind, they simply did not ask. He did not invite them to. Every morning he arrived at 7:43. He made his coffee. He sat down, and before he opened a single report or answered a single message, he spent 11 minutes updating the reconciliation archive. I sat near enough to watch the clock. 11 minutes. Not approximately, not sometimes 9 and sometimes 14. 11 minutes every single morning, 4 years without interruption. I had watched this routine without understanding its nature, the way you can observe something significant without yet having the vocabulary for what makes it significant. I came to understand it later. It was not a habit. It was a maintenance routine. It was the specific, deliberate work of a man who was keeping something alive that he understood, with full clarity and without drama, might eventually need to be handed to someone else, and who was building it, therefore, with the precision of someone who expects to be absent when it finally matters most. Preston Hale had noticed Marcus during his 3rd week at Callaway. Not because he had read the file with any particular care, but because Marcus had flagged an inconsistency in the quarterly disclosure that 3 senior auditors had reviewed and cleared. The inconsistency was small, the specific kind of small that is visible only to a person paying attention at the correct resolution, a number that rounded correctly in isolation but was in tension with a figure 2 documents away. It was also, as Marcus noted in a single paragraph memo left on Preston's desk without follow-up or elaboration, the kind of small that grows if nobody addresses it. Preston read the memo twice. He walked to Marcus's desk and asked him to come into his office. He was in that office for 37 minutes. When he came out, Preston's face had the expression of a person who has just performed a rapid and private recalculation. He said nothing to me or to anyone else, I observed. He returned to his office and closed the door. What I know is that Marcus left Preston's office and began, in the weeks that followed, building the reconciliation archive. It grew over 4 months into a living documentation system. Layered, cross-referenced, updated on a fixed weekly cycle that tracked every financial commitment Callaway made against every disclosure filed with every regulatory body across the preceding 8 years. It incorporated timeline flags and margin calculations and a system of annotations that Marcus had developed himself, drawing from methods across 3 different industries and refining them into something that was entirely his own. It was work of a kind that is not easy to recognize from the outside as extraordinary, because it does not announce itself. It simply sits there, accurate and complete, doing exactly what it was built to do, invisible, until the day it is no longer there. Preston Hale had understood, from the moment he read the first version of the archive, that it was both a tool and a structural risk. A tool because Callaway's compliance was genuinely and significantly improved by its existence. A risk because a sufficiently thorough cross-reference of fund allocations against filed disclosures would, given enough time and consistency, produce a coherent and documented picture of what he had been doing with the Series C charitable fund since the previous February. He had managed this risk for 4 years with a technique that required no active intervention and left no traceable action. He had simply never ensured that Marcus's access credentials were formally documented or that his working knowledge was structured for transfer. A person who appears to be a quiet, mid-level auditor who leaves precisely at 3 each afternoon does not attract the kind of institutional attention that produces knowledge transfer protocols. When Diane Callaway arrived with a mandate for structural efficiency and asked for a briefing on the audit division, Preston had provided one that was accurate in its details and precisely wrong in its emphases. The kind of briefing that a new executive, under significant pressure, receives and has no immediate reason to question. Diane was not careless. She was new. She was under significant pressure, and she had been given a complete sounding account by the person with the most to gain from her proceeding quickly. These are not excuses. They are the conditions under which a capable person makes a wrong call. The people they brought in after Marcus left were among the best available for the task, as it had been described to them. Gerald Oates had 30 years of experience in financial systems audit and a reputation that arrived before he did. His team had solved problems other teams had declared unsolvable. They were not failing because they lacked skill or competence or they needed the architecture of Marcus's annotation system, the grammar of his thinking, the particular logic by which he connected 11 separate data streams into a single coherent living record, or bit, existed in its complete form in exactly one place, and that place had been escorted out of the building 17 days before they arrived. On day 4, Gerald sat down across from Diane and delivered his assessment in the level, unhurried tone of someone who has learned over 30 years that the most respectful thing he can give a client is accuracy without cushioning. "The archive is coherent," he said. "I cannot read it." Diane looked at him. "Be specific." "The password is one problem. It is not the central problem." Gerald placed his tablet on the desk between them. "The annotation system documents a set of relationships between financial data streams using a notation that reflects the specific cognitive framework of the person who built it. To understand what the documents are saying, you need to understand why they were structured the way they were structured, the reasoning behind the choices, not just the choices themselves. Without that, we are in possession of every file, and we cannot tell you what any of them mean in relation to any other." He paused. "The reasoning lives in one person." Diane was quiet. Outside her window, the city moved through its ordinary afternoon below her, the low, persistent hum of a place that does not stop to accommodate individual emergencies. 27 days, she said. "To file clean," Gerald confirmed. "After that, the exposure is significant, and the nature of the incompleteness becomes a matter of record." On day 7, I went to Diane's office and I closed the door. I want to be honest about what it cost me to do this, because the honesty is not incidental to the story. I had been in the conference room on that Tuesday morning. I had watched Marcus walk to the elevator. I had returned to my desk and opened my files and told myself, in the careful, evasive language people use when they are avoiding an uncomfortable decision, that I was not the appropriate person to raise it. That someone with more standing would see what needed to be done. That it was not my place. On day 7, I finally understood something I should have understood sooner. I was the person in possession of the available information, and waiting for a more appropriate messenger was a reliable method for ensuring the information never arrived at all. I told Diane what I knew about the archive, not from his file, which I had never read, from 11 years of sitting 12 feet away, the quality of those morning 11 minutes, the specific unvarying discipline of them, the memo about the small inconsistency that grows, the way he held a problem, the 11 or 12 seconds of complete stillness that preceded every significant move he made. A stillness I had eventually recognized as the signature of a person thinking all the way to the end of something before committing to a direction. I told her that in 11 years of shared proximity, I had not once watched Marcus Webb miss anything, not a figure, not a pattern, not the kind of small that grows. Diane listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked the question that told me she had understood the full weight of what I was saying. Why didn't he explain himself, in that room? He knew what he was, why didn't he say it? I thought about this for a moment that was probably longer than she expected. "I don't think he believed the words would land in that moment," I said. The decision was already made, and Preston had given you a complete story. Marcus left one warning, a real one, specific and accurate, and trusted that it would either make sense in time or it wouldn't. I paused. He doesn't repeat himself. Diane sat with this for a moment, then she said simply, "Find me everything." What Petra Walsh assembled over the following 72 hours came from three sources. A deposition archive from a civil case filed against Hargrove Capital 4 years earlier, in which Marcus was named as the originating architect of a verification framework that had subsequently been registered as proprietary institutional property under the name of a managing director who had not been employed at the firm. During the years the framework was conceived or built. A thread on a specialized financial systems forum, traced by Petra through 3 degrees of cross-reference to a username that resolved back to Marcus, in which someone had answered a 7-year-old technical question about state memory reset sequences in distributed verification systems with a precision that 4 senior engineers, responding in the thread, had each independently described as the most complete and accurate history that Platform had ever received in its 16-year history. And a phone call that arrived unsolicited on the morning of day 9 from a retired senior partner at Hargrove Capital named Douglas Fenn, who asked to speak to whoever was handling the current situation and said, without being prompted, that he had been carrying something for 4 years, and that this was the moment he intended to say it clearly. Douglas Fenn said this: Marcus Webb had designed every piece of the architecture Hargrove currently billed clients to use. He had built it over 3 years with minimal institutional support and no formal documentation that survived his departure. 6 weeks after Marcus left, Managing Director Kyle Pressman had filed the framework with Hargrove's IP registry under his own name. Douglas Fenn had known this. He had said nothing because Marcus had asked him, quietly and without elaboration, not to make a dispute of it. He had respected that request for 4 years. He had spent a significant portion of those 4 years uncertain whether his respect had been the right response. Diane read the full report on the morning of day 10, seated at her desk without moving. When she reached Douglas Fenn's account, she stopped. She sat still for a moment that lasted beyond the usual length of a pause. The document made a small sound against the desk surface when she set it down. Then she opened the second folder, the one with Preston Hale's name on the tab. For 22 months, Preston had been redirecting a portion of the Series C charitable fund through a shell entity registered in the Cayman Islands that existed on paper only and had never delivered a service to any person or institution anywhere. The total redirected was $2. $3 million over 22 months. By the measures used to assess financial fraud in large institutional contexts, this is not an enormous number. By the measures that describe 3 state programs education designed to children in underserved school districts, programs that had been operating on reduced resources for 22 months, and making decisions about what to cut and what to preserve, and which children to reach with less than they had budgeted for. By those measures, $2. $3 million is not a small number at all, and it had been sustained, without detection, for precisely as long as nobody had built the kind of cross-referenced living archive that tracked every financial commitment against every disclosure filed with every regulatory body, updated every single morning by a man in a gray jacket who arrived at 7:43 and spent 11 minutes doing work that nobody around him fully understood. Marcus had known what he was finding. He had kept going. He had kept the record accurate and complete and true, and he had left it intact for whoever eventually came looking, because the record deserved to exist regardless of what happened to the person who built it. Diane drove to Harwick Hill on the morning of day 11. The house was small and set back from the sidewalk behind an oak tree, with the settled authority of something that has been in one place long enough to become a fact about that place. The front door was painted a particular shade of blue, not chosen from a palette, not fashionable, but the color of something repainted with care and patience, and what was at hand and what would hold. Nora answered in socks with foxes on them, spool held by one uneven ear. Her dark eyes moved across Diane's face with the unhurried and unselfconscious inventory of a child who has not yet learned that looking at someone directly is something you are supposed to moderate. "Is your dad home?" Diane asked. "He's fixing the fence," Nora said. She looked at Diane for another moment. "You look like you didn't sleep very much." "I didn't," Diane said. Nora considered this with the full weight it deserved. "Daddy says when something is important, your brain doesn't want to stop thinking about it even when you tell it to." She stepped back and held the door open with the matter-of-fact hospitality of a child who has been raised in a house where people are let in. "He says a fence that leans keeps leaning until someone fixes it. Otherwise it falls on something. Diane walked through the house. Books arranged by subject, a precise grid of Nora's drawings on the kitchen wall, a photograph on the windowsill above the sink, a woman laughing at something off camera, her hand mid-gesture, captured in the full and unself-conscious middle of herself. Diane did not stop at it, it stayed with her regardless. Marcus was in the backyard replacing a fence post. Canvas jacket, work gloves. He looked up when he heard the screen door open, and his expression settled into the same quality it had always carried in the office. Present, unhurried, committed to nothing in advance. "I owe you an apology," Diane said. "A direct one, not from the company, from me." He waited. "I looked at you in that room, and I decided what you were before I asked you a single question. I knew better than to do that. I did it anyway, I'm sorry." Marcus pulled off one glove and set it on the post. "Preston gave you a complete account," he said. "Complete enough that the gaps didn't have visible edges. That's not an excuse for the part that was mine." "No," he said, "it isn't, but it's the true account of what happened." He looked at her with the same quality of attention his daughter had, direct, without performance. "You found the archive. We found it, we cannot enter it." "I know. The Series D disclosure is due in 20 days. The programs the Series C fund was meant to serve are still waiting for an honest accounting. That matters to me, not as a compliance question. As a question about what that money was supposed to do and for whom." He was quiet. He looked at the post and then back at her. "One condition," he said. She nodded. He told her. No request to restore his title, though that was understood and fair. No request for recognition beyond what the record owed. One structural thing. A formal whistleblower protection policy, written with real enforcement mechanisms independently overseen, structured so that it could not be quietly removed by a SLEA phone or anyone whose interests conflicted with its purpose. Covering any employee who surfaced concerns about financial irregularities affecting the people of fund was created to serve. He asked for this because he had spent 4 years watching what becomes of records when the people who understand them best have no protection for being honest about what they find. Diane held his gaze. The afternoon light came through the oak in pieces. "Done," she said. "Unmodified. 3:15, he said. "I know," she said. "It doesn't change." From inside the house, Nora's voice came through the screen door. "Daddy, Spool wants to see the fence." Something shifted in Marcus's face, the specific small shift of a person returning to the thing that was always the primary thing. 2 minutes, he said. Preston Hale was removed from the building on a Thursday afternoon with board representatives, a federal examiner, and security positioned at both lobby exits. He walked with the controlled composure of a man still working the angles. At the door, he said, to no one in particular, that his attorneys would address the nature of the misunderstanding. Nobody responded. The doors closed. The story moved forward without him. Marcus returned on a Monday. He opened the archive. He did not rush. He briefed the compliance team across 3 sessions over 4 days, because knowledge transferred carelessly is knowledge partially lost, and the people inheriting this system deserved to understand what they were inheriting. He moved the 11-step state memory diagnostic sequence, the sequence that had never existed in any written form anywhere in the world except inside his own working knowledge, into a formal internal document, and walked 3 members of the systems team through it until they could reproduce it without reference. He corrected the Series D disclosure to reflect the full accounting of the Series C charitable fund across the complete 22-month period, including the shell entity, and the 3 state programs that had operated on reduced resources throughout that time. He filed the corrected disclosure 7 days before the regulatory deadline. His name was restored on the originating documentation of the verification framework. A single-line amendment in a technical archive that almost no one would ever open. It was not announced. It was simply made accurate. The work had a true author, and now the record said so. That was enough. It was exactly enough. The whistleblower protection policy was ratified by the board on a Wednesday and entered into force the same afternoon. It had teeth. It had independent oversight. It was the kind of document that exists in the world because one person decided, without any reward attached to the deciding, that the next person who finds themselves holding a difficult truth should not have to choose between honesty and survival. On the Friday of that first full week back, I arrived at 7:38. Marcus was already at his desk, coffee beside the keyboard, archive open, 11 minutes. I sat at my desk, and I watched him work, and I thought about what I had decided on day 7, and about what would have existed in the world if I had made a different choice. I thought about the 3 state programs and the children in those schools who did not know what a reconciliation archive was, and would never know Marcus Webb's name, and were simply attending schools that received the funding they were supposed to receive. because one man had quietly kept an accurate record for 4 years, and another had chosen, on the 7th day of a crisis, to say what he knew. I thought about Nora at the front door, telling a stranger that a fence that leans keeps leaning until someone fixes it. I thought about what quiet actually is, not as a temperament, not as the absence of something, but as a sustained and deliberate choice about where to direct one's attention and one's effort. Not the quiet of someone with nothing to say. The quiet of someone who has decided that what they are building matters more than whether anyone notices them building it. On Monday morning of the following week, I came in at 7:40. Marcus was at his desk. Beside his coffee mug, set at the corner with the specific care of something given and received thoughtfully, was a small gray flannel rabbit with one ear longer than the other and a repair in white thread along the left seam. I looked at it for a moment. Marcus did not look up from his screen. Nora left spool, I said. She said he should stay here for a while. His eyes stayed on the archive. She said more people can see him here. He returned to his 11 minutes. His hands were completely still above the keyboard, and then they began to move. Unhurried and exact, the way good work moves when it has found its correct measure and is simply doing what it was built to do and has been left to do it. At 3:15 he was not at his desk. He was where he had always been. He was exactly where he had chosen to be every single day for 4 years, and every day before that, and every day that followed. I have sat near his empty desk at 3:15 more afternoons than I can count now. I have noticed the way the floor changes at that hour, the particular shift in ambient noise as people move toward the end of their day, the quality of light through the east windows, the fact that Marcus's desk holds a stillness that is different from the stillness of an empty desk. It holds the stillness of a desk belonging to someone who will return. There is a version of this story that centers on the villain's removal, on the disclosure filed, on the regulatory record corrected. Those things happened and they matter, but they are not what I find myself returning to. What I return to is the 11 minutes. Every single morning for 4 years before the floor filled and the day's noise began, a man who had already lost the thing that was most important to him sat down and spent 11 minutes maintaining something he was not required to maintain, that nobody around him fully understood, that nobody above him would have noticed if he had stopped. He did not stop. He kept going, and he kept going, and he kept the record accurate and complete, because the record deserved to be accurate and complete, because the people it existed to protect deserved its protection, regardless of whether anyone would ever understand what he was doing or say so. This is what I think about when I sit at my desk and look at the space where he works. Not the ending, the 11 minutes. Morning light coming through the east windows. A 6-year-old girl with dark, steady eyes and a gray rabbit setting down her drawing to look up when she heard the front door, the way she always looked up, because he was always on time. This is a work of fiction. All names, characters, companies, institutions, and events portrayed in this story are entirely fictional and are the product of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or to actual events or organizations is purely coincidental. This story was created for entertainment and inspirational purposes only. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, and share it with someone who has ever been underestimated. Every week, we tell the stories of the people the world walked past too quickly. They were worth stopping for.